The Hieroglyphic Monad of John Dee of London. Mathematically, magically, kabbalistically, and anagogically explained to the most wise king of the Romans, Bohemia and Hungary, Maximilian. Theorem 1. By means of a straight line and a circle was the first and simplest production and representation of things made, both non-existent and latent in the envelopes of nature, into light. Theorem 2. But neither without a line may a circle, nor without a point can a line be made artificial. Therefore points and monads, by the same reason, things both began to be first, and by which periphery are enclosed, however great they may be, the central point can't in any way exist without its ministry. Theorem 3. Therefore, the visible central point of the hieroglyphic monad refers to the earth, around which both the sun and the moon and the other planets make their courses. And in this function, because the sun holds the highest dignity, we mark him by excellence with a complete circle, with a visible center. Theorem 4. The moon's hemicycle seems to appear as if it were above and below the solar course, yet it observes the sun as its lord and king. It seems to rejoice in its form and proximity so much that it also emulates in the magnitude of its semi-diameter, as appears to common men, and to the same it always turns its light, and at length it so desires to be imbued with the solar rays, such that, transformed by the same, it disappears from the whole heaven, until after some days, then the horned figure appears just as depicted. Theorem 5. And certainly when the lunar semicircle is brought to its solar completion, evening and morning became one day. Let it therefore be the first in which the light of the philosophers was made. Theorem 6. From here we see the sun and the moon are supported by a rectilinear cross, which by reason can be signified by hieroglyphics, both as a ternary and quaternary. Aptly enough, indeed, a ternary from two straight lines, and common to both, as if it were a copulating point. The quaternary, indeed, from four lines, containing four right angles, each twice for this purpose repeated, and thus in the same place, which most secretly also the octonary offers itself. I doubt that our predecessors, the Magi, ever saw it, but you will note most carefully the magical ternary of the first fathers and the sophists consisted of body, spirit, and soul. Whence, manifestly from here, we have the primary septenary, from two, namely, right angles and a common point, then four lines from the one source, separating themselves. Theorem 7. By means of elements removed from their natural seats, they shall teach the experimenter how to make their own return to the same places naturally by straight lines, the dislocated, homogeneous parts of them, It shall not be absurd, then, to find the mystery of the four elements into which the elementals individually can finally be resolved by four straight lines from a single point running out into opposite parts. You will also note this carefully, that the geometers teach that a line is produced from a continuous flow. We therefore advise to do so by similar reason, while our elementary lines from droplets, like points physically, are produced by continuous chance, as if by flowing in our mechanical magic. Theorem 8. The quaternal, moreover, the Kabbalistic expansion thereof, according to the usual phrase of numeration, when we say 1, 2, 3, 4, presents a denarius in summation. As Pythagoras himself used to say, for 1, 2, 3, and 4 make 10. Not without reason, therefore, the rectilinear cross, that is, the 21st letter of the Roman alphabet, is judged to be made of 4 straight lines, and was assumed by the most ancient Latin philosophers to signify the denarius. Its place is also defined there, where the ternary, leading its force through the septenary, established itself. Theorem 9. This will seem to be the best fit for our monad, sun, and moon, when by the magic of the four elements the most exact separation has been made into their lines, and then, through the peripheries of these lines, for a circle may be described for the magnitude of every given line. By the laws of geometry, a circular conjunction has been made in the complement of the sun. For then it cannot be hidden how much the proportion of the cross of the denarius serves our monad, sun, and moon. Theorem 10. The dodecatheron of Aries is most well known to all in the use of astrologers, as if to mean sharp-edged or pointy-birthed by this figure. Thus it is agreed that from this place in the sky the fiery triplicity is noted from the beginning. But therefore to signify that the ministry of fire in this monad's practice is required, we have added the astronomical sign of Aries. And thus briefly we have completed one hieroglyphic consideration of our monad, which we thus wish to be presented in a single hieroglyphic context. In this monad, the moon and the sun desire their own elements to be separated, in which the tenfold will flourish in proportion, and this will be done by the ministry of fire. Theorem 11. The mystical sign of Aries, made up of two semicircles connected at a common point, is most fittingly assigned to the place of the equinoctial nikithemera, or night time. For the time of 24 hours, distributed in the manner of the equinox, denotes our most secret proportions. I mean ours with respect to the earth. Theorem 12. The most ancient wise magi have handed down to us 5 hieroglyphic signs of the planets, all composed indeed from the characters of the moon or of the sun, with the hieroglyphic sign of the elements or of Aries, similar to those which you see depicted here. Each of these, which individually in the hieroglyphic way from our previously laid foundations, it will not be difficult to explain. But first, of those which have the character of the moon, we will now treat periphrastically, then of the solar. Our lunar nature, while through the knowledge of the elements, having revolved once around our earth, was mystically called Saturn, and for the same reason Jupiter also had a name, and by this retained a more secret figure. And they thus marked the moon, elemented for the third time more obscurely, that which they accustomed to call Mercury, who, as you see, is of the lunar sort, this to be produced by the fourth revolution, as it seems some sophists are wanting. But according to our secret purpose, it will not be contrary. Now our most magical spirit, instead of the moon, will administer the work, Teslocanseus, of the whitening. And by his spiritual powder he alone speaks with us, through the middle of the day, as it were, without words, in hieroglyphics, introducing these four geogamic figures into the purest and simplest earth, prepared by us, and imprinting them in place of another. Theorem 13. Is the mystic character of Mars, then, not made up of the hieroglyphs of the Sun and Aries, with the partial intervention of the elementary magisterium? And Venus, I pray you, is it not made up of the Sun and the fuller explanation of elements? These planets, therefore, regard the solar periphoron, the solar circumambulation, and the work of the anaxopurestheos, the work of the solar resurrection in flames, in whose progress is that other conspicuous Mercury, the first indeed uterine brother. To be lunar assuredly is to be solar, the completed magic of the elements, as the hieroglyphic messenger himself speaks to us most expressively. We now wish to fix our eyes on him and to lend him a more attentive ear, and with the nod of God, this is that Mercury of the philosophers, that most famous microcosm and Adam. But some of the very most experienced were accustomed to place the sun itself in his place and rank, which we, in this age of ours, cannot do, unless we were to place some soul separated from the body by the art of pyranomy over this work of chrysocoralinoi, the work of golden corals, by which means it is both difficult to do and extremely hazardous because of the fiery and sulphurous elements that the breath brings with it. But that she, certainly, soul, will be able to perform wonders, indisputably, then, to the lunar disk, or to Mercury at least, as light-bearer, and indeed as fire-bringer, to bind with unbreakable bounds. Then, in the third place, as they wish, to complete our septenary number, to show us this son of philosophers. Of these two theorems, the arcana is to be signified. Just see how exactly, how openly our hieroglyphic monad corresponds to this anatomy. And the diagram here is noted, the whole of names of lower astronomy, the principal monadic anatomy. Theorem 14. That from the sun and the moon this whole magisterium depends, has already been clearly confirmed. Of this, even that thrice great Hermes once reminded us, that his father is the sun, affirming, and the moon his mother. Moreover, we know he is nourished by the Lemnian earth, and doubtless by the lunar and solar rays which exercise a singular influence around him. Theorem 15. The labors of the sun and the moon around the earth we propose for consideration of the philosophers. Of this indeed, in what way, while the solar pleasure is turned about in Aries, herself then in the next sign, namely Taurus, receives a new dignity of light, and is exalted above her innate powers, which, more notable than others, luminarium, the neighborhood, the ancients explained by a certain mystical character distinguished by the name Taurus, which indeed is the exaltation of the moon, and even from the very first age of men, among the pleasures of astronomers, is most well known, committed to memory. But they understood the mystery of that one alone, who have escaped the understanding absolutes of the mysteries. And for a similar reason, they said that Venus is the house of Taurus, of chaste and prolific conjugal love. For thus, he pursis tei pursei teptatai. Nature delights by nature's delights, as the great Ostanes has concealed in his most secret mysteries. In truth, sun, for which reason himself, after some others having admitted eclipses of his light, receives the strength of Mars, and in the same house, namely our Aries, is said to triumph in exhaltation, which most secret mysteries our monad also demonstrates clearly and most perfectly. Indeed, that hieroglyphic figure of Taurus, which is depicted here, and that of Mars, which we have given in Theorems 12 and 13, which indicates the sun as a straight line tending towards Aries. But from the present theory, another Kabbalistic anatomy of our monad presents itself, of which this is the true and artistic explanation. The exhaltations of the sun and moon by means of the science of elements. A notation. I think two things are most worthy of note here. One, that this hieroglyphic figure of Taurus, to us, the Greek diphthong ö, exactly represents the singular genitive termination of the first declension. Secondly, from an appropriate local metathesis, it shows us alpha in two ways, with the circle and semicircle tangent only, or with each other, as here, intersecting. Theorem 16. Now, for our purpose, we must philosophize a little about the cross, our cross, although it is made up of two straight lines, as we have said, and indeed equal to them. Nevertheless, they do not intersect each other into equal lengths. But we wanted both equal and unequal parts to be had in the distribution of our mystical cross. We suggest that in the power of the two sections, because they are equal in size, the power of the equilateral cross also lies hidden. For most generally, a cross, ordered to be made of equal straight lines, must be made with an equal division of lines. A certain justice of nature requires. According to the rule of whose justice concerning the equilateral cross, which is the 21st letter of the Latin alphabet, we will propose the following to be carefully weighed. Of the cross, rectilinear, rectangular, and or equilateral. If through a common point of intersection and opposite angles, the straight lines are conceived to pass wherever they may be. Or from either side of the cross thus made, the parts are entirely similar and equal. Then the figures of which are same as the Latin letter, which is the fifth of the vowels, and most commonly used by the most ancient Latin philosophers to denote 5. And I think that this was not assuredly done by them, since it is the median of our denarius, the conformal, therefore, from that figure thus duplicated from this hypothetical division of the cross, arising in the same way as both represent the 5, although one is erect, the other here overturned. We are reminded how the square root here imitates the square multiplication, which here marvelously falls into a circular number, namely 5, whence it is certain that 25 are produced as a square product, as also the letter itself, being the 20th, and of the vowels the 5th. Now we will consider another position of the equilateral cross itself, namely, which is similar to the position of our monadic cross. But we suppose that a similar two-part division of the cross occurs here as above, whence also a double figure of another letter, the Latin alphabet, shows itself, one being erect, the other overturned and averted, which, from the ancient custom of Latins, is used to represent 50. This, therefore, seems to me to be established first, because it is indeed the mark of that quinary taken from our denarius of the cross, but located in that position in which all of the greatest mysteries of the cross itself is the most consummate hieroglyphic mark, whence, completing the power of the penary in its quinary virtue, it congratulates the number 50 as if on its birth. Oh my God, how many mysteries are there! And the name El. And indeed, for this reason, too, it seems to respect the power of the cross itself, that is placed in the middle, between the first letter of the alphabet and the cross itself, the denarius, and from either of them it is itself in order the 10th. And since in the cross we have shown that there are two such integral parts, considering now only the numerical power of the latter, it is most obvious that the 100 grows from there. But if, by the law of squares, they suffer mutual multiplication, twice 1,000 will give us 500, of which squared compared to the square of the former circular number, and applied to the same, will restore 100. So that the cross itself, according to the power of its denarius, unfolding itself, will be acknowledged to be 100. And yet, since it is but the unique character of the cross itself, it also represents 1. Hence, therefore, besides other things more worthy of note, from these theories of the cross, counting and progressing, are now supremely esteemed in this manner: 1, 10, 100 denarii, powers of 10, thus raising us up by the proportion of the cross. Theorem 17. As can be gathered from the 6th theorem, in our cross 4 right angles are considered, to each of which the preceding theorem would teach us to attribute the meaning of 5. Indeed, those placed in one way, but those who obtained the other position, the same theorem of the 50 numbers admits of making hieroglyphic notes. Thus, it is most evident that the denarius cross is commonly denoted. Then, in the order of the Latin alphabet, it is the 21st letter, whence it is made that which the sophist Mercubables once said 21 by the same letter signified. Finally, and most simply, it can be considered as one note. It is seen to be whatever kind, whatever amount of other power it has. From all of which we see that it is possible to conclude with the best Kabbalistic demonstration, our cross, mystics, can be signified by a wonderful compendium as 252. For 4 makes 5, 54, 10, 21, and 1, 250 makes 2. Which number, by 2 other reasons from the foregoing, we can elicit. Thus, to Kabbalistic novices, we commend the same to be extracted for brevity, thus to students. Yet of the same masterly number, various artful productions, judged worthy of philosophers' consideration. Nor will I conceal from you another memorable mystagogy. Our cross into 2 other letters itself distributed, past, seeing. Thus, as we have previously weighed their numerical power in a certain way, so in turn we will now compare their verbal power with the cross itself, which is the source of light, the word, final and magisterial, from that trinity in the unity of the word by co-design and consensus. With the greatest admiration we shall understand. Theorem 18. From our 12th and 13th theorems, it can be gathered that celestial astronomy is, as it were, the parent and teacher of the inferior. Therefore, raising our Kabbalistic eyes to heaven, illumined by the theoretical illumination of the foretold mysteries, we will see precisely such an anatomy of our monad in the light and life of nature, thus always showing itself to us. And with a nod, the most secret mysteries of this physics, analysis, most openly revealed. And I would like to apply the figure of the oval to this coordination. Heavenly messengers, while we have sometimes contemplated the theorists and heavenly gestures we have been taught. For the oval, or egg, which itself in the ether forms a circuit by its course, is well known to astronomers, and since this should be sufficient for the wise, our interpretations of this celestial plan, thus set forth in hieroglyphics, are entirely consistent with the foregoing. Henceforth, having been warned, let those most pitiful alchemists learn to recognize their various errors. What is the water of the albumen of eggs? What is the oil of the yolk? What is the lime of eggs? Hence, let those most ignorant impostors with their despair understand, and many other things similar to these. Here we have almost the whole of what is proportioned by nature. This is that eagle's egg, which the scarab once broke because of the injury which the violence and cruelty of that bird had inflicted on timid and brutish men. Although some fled to the cave of the scarab, by the grace of imploring help, they were not freed from there, but the scarab himself alone, thinking this injury must be avenged on him by all means. As he was ready with a sharp spirit and a steadfast will, as such he did not strive for it with any strength or wit. Hence, while the scarab pursued the eagle with various efforts, using the most subtle art of dung, he finally caused his egg, or one deposited into the lap of Jupiter, to fall to the ground and thus burst. And for the same, or for another reason, the Scarab would have finally wiped out the entire Aquiline species from the earth, if Jupiter, only preventing evil, had done it. At which time of the year the eagles carefully care for their eggs, so that no scarabs may fly around. However, I would advise those who are troubled by the cruelty of this bird to learn a very useful art from those sun singers themselves, who thus live by hiding in certain times. For whom, although they may not do it themselves, it would still be most pleasing to be able to take revenge on their enemy by their own indications and signs. But here, O king, I am not attempting to act like an Aesop, but like an Oedipus. Those whose minds thus concerning the highest mysteries of nature first entered upon the fable would confess, if they were present here. I know for sure there are some who by the art of the scarab, if they had dissolved an eagle's egg, a lime of the same, with the pure albumen, would first temper the whole. Then they would cover that temperament with the liquid of the yolk in its entirety, in an artful order, by turning and revolving, as the scarabs gather their balls. Thus a great metamorphosis of the egg would take place, now of course with the egg white itself disappearing, and as if in the rolled albumen itself having made those many revolutions like a pinwheel, in that very yolky liquid of which artifice such a hieroglyphic sign will scarcely displease nature's economists. We've read that in earlier ages such an art was much celebrated by the most important and ancient philosophers, most certain and most useful. Anaxagoras, certainly from this teaching, later created a most excellent medicine, as we may see in his book, Prito ek zrophon physikoin, on the nature of physics. There is nothing here outside the hieroglyphic power of our monad. Whoever applies his mind more sincerely to these mysteries will most clearly perceive. Theorem 19. That the sun and moon, far more strongly than all other planets, pour forth their corporeal forces into all lower elemental bodies, a pyrrhonomical analysis of all corporal things demonstrates the effect, while the moon pours back aqueous humor, and the sun's fiery liquid, by which the corulence of mortal things on the earth is sustained. Theorem 20. Although we have above shown with a good enough reason that the elements of hieroglyphics are signified by straight lines, here, however, we will give a most exact speculation concerning the quasi-central point of our cross. In our consideration of the ternary, in no way can that be absent, in that situation of our binary. For if it could be absent, who, divine imperious mathematicians, would contend? Let him suppose that it is absent. Therefore, there will be no remainder of our binary, but the quaternary will emerge by the ablation of that point, the discontinuous unity of lines. But our adversary has supposed that the binary is a remainder, together with us. Therefore, there will be both a binary, the same, and a quaternary, by the same consideration. That tous adu napon, that they are weak, is sufficiently evident. Therefore, out of all necessity, that point must be present which, together with the binary, constitutes our ternary. nor can anything else be substituted in its place. Yet it is not of the hypostatic property of the binary itself, nor in any way a part. That it is not a part is demonstrated from this. All parts of a line are lines, but that to be a point, the hypothesis confirms. Therefore, not some part of that binary, whence much less of the hypostatic property of the binary. Therefore, it is to be noted most that it also has its own hypostasy, and nonetheless, yet, is contained in the very linear lengths of our binary. And because thus it seems to be common to both, some certain and by itself binary is considered to receive a sacred image. Hence, here we demonstrate that the quaternary is quiescent in the ternary. You, my God, forgive me, I beg, if I have now sinned against your majesty to such extent as by revealing this mystery in public writings. But I yet hope that only those who are worthy will truly understand it. Let us now proceed to our cross, the one we have assigned to the quaternary, where we will consider whether that point which is represented there can be absent. Mathematics certainly teaches us that it can be removed. For not only by that separation is our quaternary remaining, but the more distinctive it will be, the more clear it will be made in the eyes of all, with no part of its substantial proportion removed, but excessive and to the point of confusion, thus to be condemned and rejected. O almighty divine majesty, we mortals are forced to confess how much wisdom and infinity of inefficient mysteries are contained in your points and iotas, as you described and arranged by law, if the greatest earthly secrets and arcana of this one point, located and examined by me, yet in your light, can be explained by most faithfully demonstrated by various indications. Dots, namely in the divine ternary, are by no means superfluous, but dots in the kingdom of the four elements, considered indeed as feculent, corruptible, and dark, oh, thrice and 4 times blessed are those who can obtain that ternary, as it were copulative, the point, and that quaternary dangerous and superfluent, loved and dark. Leave it to the prince. Thus we will arrive at the ornaments of snowy clearness, with white vestments, O Maximilian, whom God, this mystagogy, or some Austrian family, the greatest, may at some time make, or me indeed, in the sleeping Christ, to honor of his trembling name, in these points in the superfluous land, abominable darkness, and furthermore intolerables. But lest I should now take up the profound words which are superfluous, not in the right place, that is to say, within the confines of my purpose, I shall now immediately withdraw myself, and because I have already concluded my discourse with those whose eyes are in their hearts, now I must turn my prayer to those whose hearts are still prominent in their eyes. What we have said in this place, behold, the figure inscribed with the cross, can in some way represent it. First, about the point in 2 equal lines, equally and unequally desiccated, necessarily, as if here, at A, then at B, as if a certain superfluous point of emptiness had been removed. You can see distinctly 4 straight lines at the point first common to them, separating from them thence without any resulting detriment to itself. This is the way by which our monad, progressing through the binary and ternary into the quaternary, purified, is restored to itself, made one by the proportion of equality. For every whole is equal to all its parts, and while this is done, it admits nothing of external things, our monad of units or of numbers, since it is most exactly sufficient for itself, its most absolute of all units, into whose amplitude then it is diffused by magical means, then not to be turned afterwards by the industry of the artificer, and by the greatest benefit of the monad himself, in dignity and power it is restored to its first and proper matter. Meanwhile, those which do not regard their genuine and hereditary proportion are by every means and diligence cut off, cast away forever as dregs. Theorem 21. If that which was hidden within the recesses of our monad were to be brought out into the light, and the first parts of it, as it were, the outermost parts, were to be included in the middle, and thus the philosophical transformation of the monad would take place, as you have seen above. Now, however, mystical monad, we will propose to you another local commutation to those parts whence the hieroglyphic characters of the superior planets first presented themselves to us, being erected from hence, and in the same way to the rest of the planets afterwards, each taking that place which Plato almost seemed to write to them, if they are properly deduced from that position. For in the horns of Aries itself, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars meet. Then descending the cross of Venus and Mercury, he inserted. Finally, the sun itself follows, and lowest, the moon. But these things should be discussed elsewhere, in another place. Yet I do not wish to conceal them from our monad, these philosophical treasures. And so we thought it wise to give one reason why the monad's location was changed in this way. But other things, which I know are of interest to you, see and hear from this situation. They are greater, and should be explained with a few words. Let us therefore consider the monad placed in this new configuration, into the atomical members, B, D, and C, where in that new ternary of D and C, or of the rustic indeed, are the well-known figures. But the third, which is designated by B, cannot be so easily known by all, nor is that to be considered lightly. Those well-known forms, D and C, separate and diverse from that B to show essences. Secondly, that the horns of this C are seen to be turned downwards, as if towards the earth, and of D, that part which illuminates C itself towards the earth, namely downwards, looks back, in the center of which alone there is a visible point, truly terrestrial, and that both D and C, at lower places, here make their hieroglyphic indication than B. But the earth hieroglyphically can mark for us stability and fixation. Therefore I leave it to be concluded what D and C are. Hence also a great secret to note now, whosoever can, about the previous sun and moon, which we have said, how they can receive from this a fuller and most necessary interpretation, those indeed up to this place being placed above, and the lunar horns thus being raised. But enough about this. Now let us examine the third nature of it, according to the foundations of our hieroglyphic art. First, it seems to bear on its head a double moon, or our Aries, but inverted mystically. Then it has the hieroglyphic sign of the elements attached. As for the doubled moon, thus, according to the underlying matter, it can be explained. The double degree of the moon. We are speaking of those degrees such as the expert physicists can find only 4 among all the created natures, namely to be, to live, to feel, and to understand. Therefore, the first 2 of these degrees, noting that they are in this, thus we will say the existing, alive moon. Some define life by motion, and motion is of 6 well-known species, which are certainly jointed to the cross. The elements are required here, marks the artifice. Furthermore, in these our theories, as a semicircle, we have very often handed down that the moon is hieroglyphic. So, and to signify the completed circle, the sun here. However, there are 2 semicircles, but separate, yet coupled to a common point, which, if aptly combined, as they can indeed by art, can relate to us the solar and circular fullness. From these considered together, thus summarized hieroglyphically, it is clear that we can profess this sentiment. The moon exists alive, to be managed by the dominion of the elements, having the power to represent solar fullness, similarly connected to its semicircles. Let it therefore be completed, and let that which we have called a circle be made, as we have here noted by the letter E. Let us therefore remember, first, that the solar degree was not encountered by nature, but is now artificial and constructed, and that indeed it presented itself to us at first sight, and its nature, namely in B, with its loose, flowing, dissolved parts, not solidly compacted into the solar appearance. Then the semi-diameter of these semicircles is not equal to the semi-diameter of D and C, those born thus to us, and most well known to all, but are much smaller. Whence it is clear that B itself is not of such an amplitude as D, C themselves are. And this is well confirmed to us by E itself, in this circular work, promoted from B to the species E. For from there emerges for us only the character of Venus. We have therefore already made it clear by these hieroglyphic syllogisms. From B we are not to hope for the true D, nor was it there at first a true C in the nature of B. Whence there was not a true moon alive. Therefore you can now doubt about life and motion as well, whether it is truly and naturally so. However, as we have already made clear to the prudent, at least analogical, indeed, all things which are said in a similar about B phrase, as also above which was briefly summarized about C and D, analogically, B itself with its elements properly agree. What we have also added about the nature of Aries must exactly agree with this one, since it bears the same figure of that in its head, albeit inverted, as also the same mystical note of the elements is added to B. Since, however, we see from this anatomy that the single body of our monad dissected with such skill, this new third has come forth. From there we cannot doubt such members will embrace each other in mutual sympathy, and will admit, as it were of their own accord, the most absolute monadic union. Thus, in these members, magnetic power is cultivated. Finally, I was pleased to note this, thanks to refreshing of the mind, that the same be to us rustic presents very quickly as many letters as there are points, above to be seen in the head, and as it wears on the forehead, these brackets, namely 3, as well as the others as 6, but in sum 3 times 3, quite rude and rural, fluid and voluble. As from semicircles, one or more, you can see they are made the same. But in the hands of the experienced and literate, there is a firmer and more stable method of forming these letters, an infinity of mysteries. Here I had before my eyes, but I wanted to break this theory with this play. However, I understand that I will promote the efforts of some people quite a bit, if our monad being restored to its former mystical situation, and with its individual members artfully composed, I at least warned them, and urged them more precisely, now to rescue who was that Aryan fire of the first triplicity, who was the cause that the sun could be exalted above his voluntary degree. And the other previous things, very many of them, are to be run through by wiser second meditations. But now we, hastening to other things, have wished to point out with our finger the path to others, to which they should insist, not only in a friendly way, but also most faithfully, yet keeping silent about the mysteries of others, as we have said, the conspicuous infinity. Theorem 22. It will be easily said that the mysteries of our monad have not yet been exhausted, if certain more secret vessels of the holy art, that entirely Kabbalistic one indeed, are to be revealed to the initiates of the sun, carefully taken from the workshop of the same monad, I would now exhibit them to your royal serenity for viewing. Therefore, with the entire connection of our monad having been wisely dissolved, let us add letters to note each part, for the sake of distinction. As you see, here 'tis done. We therefore point out that alpha is a certain artificial vessel, from A and B, with both common and now the semi-diameter itself, M, is made manifest. And from the Greek alphabet, the first, by this letter, the only part of the local metathesis is different, as you see. For from the straight line, the circle and semicircle, we are the first to teach its true and mystical symmetry, although we have also warned above that the same can be made from the circle and semicircle, yet all fall back on the same mystical purpose. Lambda and delta. First, indeed, they are like images of other vessels, lambda indeed of glass, but delta being of earth. But in the second place, lambda and delta can remind us of a certain pestle and mortar, to be prepared from a certain material, indeed, that with the same we may crush unperforated artificial pearls, or crystalline and beryl plates, chrysolites, then precious rubies, carbuncles, and other very rare artificial stones into the finest powder. Finally, what you see marked with Omega is a vessel most full of mysteries, and from the very last letter of the Greek alphabet, now restored to its first established mystagogy, or the only part differing in manifest local metathesis, from two and that also constant semicircles. Furthermore, it is not necessary in this place for us to say anything about the common necessities of vessels, both their shapes and the materials from which they must be made. However, this must be considered. Alpha, to seize the opportunity of performing its function from the most secret and brief artifice of the spiracle, and a certain liter of wine, the most expeditious primordial specimen, will elicit from novices of the work. Meanwhile, while the more subtle ways of preparing them, a more artful way will be made known. But in lambda, in the function of its principal office, all external air or wind would cause great damage. Omega, however, is to man all hours. Porisma, in seeking tes hieras technes, in seeking of the sacred art. Who now isn't able to smell the most delicious and healthful fruits, or the mystery arising from these, I say, mere harsh letters? Some of which, to be seen as in a mirror, we will bring a little closer from our Hesperid gardens, bringing nothing outside our monad into the middle, for the very straight line which appears in alpha is homologous to it. From the last anatomy, that part of the cross which is marked by the letter M. The rest also can be seen from whence they come here. With these words, I know that I am not only giving such aphorisms, but also apodices to those in whom fiery vigor and radiance within thrive and shine, and a celestial origin, so that they can easily now provide arbor to the great Democritus. To tes psyches iamma kai pantos, mochthu autirion kata skeusai, bulomenois, non musicon esse hoc dogma, sed musicon, et arcanum ut et illi qui asservit, quod logoi demiuripois, cosmo methodeuexae, hina ho theorphon kai ho theogenes anthropos, diates eutheais ergasias, kai musicon logon matei. That the soul's medicine and the ransom for all labor is constructed by the boulomenos, that is, not just a mystical dogma, but a musical one, which the creators of the cosmos by their words guide us, so that both the God-fearing and God-born man, through direct work, may learn from mystical reasons. Theorem 23. We present here, accurately annotated, the symmetries that we have already observed in the hieroglyphic construction of our monad, and that should be observed by those who will be pleased to wear the same in their rings, seals, or otherwise have it. In the name of Jesus Christ, on our behalf, I have affixed to the cross, whose spirit, who writes these things quickly through me, the pen only is me, and I wish and I hope, from our cross of the elements, let us now seek all these measurements. Or indeed, by this reason, according to the material of the argument proposed, that under the heaven of the moon, whatever receives the beginning of its generation is either composed of the four elements, or is indeed the essence of the elemental, and this in various ways is not commonly known. And because in no created thing are the elements themselves in equal proportion or power, yet by art they can be reduced to equality in certain things. As the sophists know, in our cross we constitute equal and unequal parts, which by another reason we can name, same and different, or one and many. Equilateral cross, as we have warned above, in secret admitting property. But if we were to bring into the middle the reasons which we hold of the symmetries here set forth, each one or in a different way, then for the wise we have done abundantly enough throughout the whole little work. Then we would demonstrate the causes. We would not rashly exceed the limits of our purpose, which were prescribed to us. Therefore, taking in a plane some point, as if A were through the same, let a sufficiently long straight line be drawn on both sides, which is CAK, and on the line KC, from the point A, let a perpendicular be erected, on both sides to a sufficient length produced, to infinity, as the geometers are wont to say, well, avoiding any convenience long enough, which is admitted to be DAE. Now, in AK, let the point be made wherever you like, and let B be first occupied. Line AB shall be the common measure or unit scale of our work. Of this, let a triple be taken from A towards C, and let this be AC. Of AB then doubled, let it be AE, and doubled of AB let it be AD, so that the whole of DE be of AB quadrupled. Thus then we have made our elemental cross from AB, AC, AD, and AE, that is, the quaternary of the lines. Now from BK let a line be drawn equal to AD, and let this be BI, with the center I and an interval or radius IB. Let a circle then be described, which shall be BR, cutting the line AK in the point RA by the point R towards K. Let a line be cut equal to AB, and let this be RK. At the point K, a straight line of sufficient length is drawn on both sides, at right angles with AK itself, which is PKF. From the point K itself towards F, a straight line is drawn, equal to AD, and is KF. With the center K and the interval radius KF, a semicircle FLP is described, so that FKP is the diameter of the same. Finally, at the point C, let a perpendicular be drawn to the line A on both sides, extended to a sufficient length, and this is OCQ. Afterwards, on the line CO, and from the point C, let a straight line be taken, equal to the line AB, and this is CM. With the center M and the interval radius MC, let a semicircle CHO be described, whose diameter is CMO. And finally, by a similar reason, from the line CQ and to the point C, let a line equal to AB be drawn, and let this be CN. Therefore, with center N and length NC, let there be a semicircle CGQ, of which CNQ is diameter. We have now asserted that all the required symmetries of our monad have been explained and described. However, I would like to advise the mechanic. CK, this entire line is made up of 9 unit parts, of which our fundamental line AB is 1. Hence, he can now approach the same painful task in an easier way. With all the diameters, semi-diameters, being designated, as the mechanic's art with obscure marks and lines, with no visible centers being left, except the solar center, which here the letter I is marked. And no letters are to be added. Then to the ornamentation, not any mystical means necessary by us for the reason now to be considered of the solar periphery. The mechanic can add the superficial latitude, indeed described by one parallel, but the distance of the parallels by a fourth or a fifth part of the unit, or about which can be made. But of the lunar to attribute that first appearance which after its conjunction with the sun is wont to appear in the sky, namely very horned, which will occur if from the point K towards R take that which we have said, fourth or fifth part of the unit AB, and on the end of that line, as if the center, the true lunar semi-diameter, let that second part of the periphery be drawn to the neat contact of both the former semicircles. Something similar can also be done at points M and N, erecting their perpendiculars in which a sixth or less part of AB is taken, where, having made the center but the former semi-diameters MC and NC, let those second, as if semicircles, be drawn outwards. Finally, through the same straight crosses of ours, parallels can be drawn on both sides, distant from the middle by an eighth or tenth part of AB, so that our cross from four super surfaces, as if it were linear, is made in this way, the width of which is a fourth or a fifth part of the straight line AB. I wanted to outline these ornaments in some way by adding a figure. All of which each one, according to his own opinion, might do, provided in the meantime that no, or even the slightest injury be inflicted on the mystical symmetries, lest even that negligence with the progress of time might disturb these true and most necessary hieroglyphic measurements, or let a new discipline perish, far more extensive and greater than this little book. We could, or indeed we would, explain the same, as the daughter of time, by the nod of God, will learn to teach the truth. But, which may be obvious to anyone exercising themselves in these symmetries of our monad, we will now methodically place before our eyes certain things. First, indeed, starting from our cross of the lines Quaternary, in that respect held by which, who can simply state that there are four lines, then of the same Quaternary of lines as they have a peculiar and mystical, in another way, division and reason. Thirdly, we will show by some examples that certain useful offices are destined by God in nature, which we have artfully extracted from numbers, either in this place or from other theories throughout the whole book. And we will introduce others in appropriate places, which will bear no small fruit, and having understood these well, we will very briefly explain. The Pythagorean Quaternary. All possible metathesis, 24. The Pythagorean sum, 10. All possible addition of parts gives 30. Our mathematician canon. In natural order, from the first monad, having described any amount of numbers, if from the first to the last a continued multiplication is made, as the first into the second, the product into the third, and of that product into the fourth, and in a similar manner to the last, the final product determines every possible metathesis in those so numerous places. And by the same token, in any so many different things, I highly recommend this operation to you, O king, both in every examination of nature and in other affairs of the Republic, as most useful. I am accustomed to use it in the Hebrew tzithruf, or Theorem, with greatest pleasure. The artificial quaternary. Continued by multiplication, it gives 12. By simple addition, it gives 8. By the addition of all parts, the sum is 24. All possible quaternary metatheses equal, which determine the physical health and the highest goodness of 24-karat gold, above the earth while it is held by itself. I am not ignorant, indeed, that many other numbers could have been brought forth to light from the quaternary of arithmetical virtue and formality. But he who does not perceive that these, the great obscurity of nature, have been developed and have illumined, would feel his own genius dulled, not sharpened by their increasing multitude. Therefore, as we have promised, how much authority lies in our numbers, in weighing the elements, in defining the measurement of time, and finally in prescribing certain degrees to the power and virtue of things, we show this to be gathered from the following schematics. Our numbers have this dignity that to violate their laws is a sin against nature's wisdom, which, by the same means she wishes to teach us, in examining her greatest mysteries, to which certain limits and states, they shall be bound by these. First, by virtue, whether begotten externally, grades 10 through 40, or received internally, with possibly limitless cost. Or whether by weight, whether determined by analysis, grading 3 to 4, or whether by synthesis of two types, hypologous or prologous, grades 1 to 13. And also by time, particle-wise, via the alchemical dry process, or by the great work of the wet process, that of fermentation of the stone. And this diagram looks to be like a game board, or possibly a method of divination where you might throw dies down onto it, or hold a pendulum swinging over it, something like that. Something to do with divination, possibly to determine the grade of gold, as was sort of described using the schema above. Continuing with the text. From these diagrams, if they are considered more closely, more can be extracted than is fitting to express in open words. However, we advise you of this above all, a singular one, also published by us, the first, together with this whole new art, that there is a reason here in the middle for which quaternary or denarius imposes a certain end on the numeration. And we assert that the reason which our elders brought forward was not absolute and exact, but that which we will now relate. After that monad is restored to itself completely, fully, and physically, then indeed it is the monad, the most united, and the judged unit of the Magi. It is neither in the power of nature, nor of any art, to impel the same more often than 4 times, through supercelestial revolutions, to make any progress or movement. And from there is produced he whom we, because of his eminence, wish to be so noted. And this is the reason that neither in the elemental world, nor in the celestial, nor in the supercelestial is there any created power of influence, which then would not have been most absolutely enriched and endowed. Whereof this true effect 4 most illustrious men once, philosophizing together have attained by their work, whence for a long time, astounded by the great miracle of the thing, at length they turned themselves wholly to singing, preaching, and glorifying the praises of God the Most High, who for that reason had bestowed upon them so much wisdom and most ample power and dominion over other creatures. Theorem 24. Just as in our beginning of this booklet we began with a point, a straight line, and a circle, and thus from our monadic point we have circumcised the extreme linear effluxion of our elements into a circle almost analogous to the equinoctial, which completes its circuit in 24 hours. So now finally we will conclude and end the quaternary omnimodal metathesis, the number defined 24, and metamorphosis in this our 24th theorem, to honor and glory of him who, as witness archpriest of the divine mysteries, John, in the 4th chapter of the Apocalypse, the part 4th and last, sits on the throne in the middle of whose circle 4 animals, each having 6 wings, without rest, day and night, say, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was, and who is to come, whom also from the 24 seats placed in a circuit the 24 elders falling down with their golden crowns thrown away, adoring him, saying, You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, because you created all things, and because of this will they are, and they were created. Amen, saith the 4th letter, Delta. To whom God has given the will and ability, this divine mystery to thus record in the eternal monuments of letters, and to most peacefully complete these his labors, on the 25th of January, having begun on the 13th day of the same, in the year 1564, at Antwerp.